Welcome to ACT.tv. I'm Juliana Forlano. This is our show, Act Now, where we cover progressive politics. Thanks for joining me. We've got an awesome show. I'm not going to lie. I was very excited to put it together. First, we've got the headlines where we're talking about Climate Week and climate action. That's what's going on right now. Then Laura Packard is joining us from Healthcare Voices to talk about how centrist Democrats want you and your mom and your grandma and your kid to pay more for prescription drugs because Big Pharma is, they're suffering. Big Pharma. We need to support them with our money. No, this is wrong. And how we can fight it. She's going to talk to us about that. And then Amy Vilela, she is running. Did you know? Did you hear her when Bernie was running? She's the one who spoke about how her daughter was refused service at a hospital and subsequently died because the hospital's like, oh, you don't have insurance, so we're not going to treat you like a human being. Well, she is running for Nevada's first Senate seat. Looking forward to talking to her about that. Sounds good, yeah? All that's coming up. First up, the headlines. Headlines. Okay, it's Climate Week, and organizers are doing all kinds of things across the country to encourage businesses, governments, and others to fulfill and even level up their climate commitments because we don't have a lot of time to waste. One group I am taking a shine to are the Science Moms. They're a group of climate scientists who are also mamas. Check out these two mothers introducing themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melissa Burt, and I am a research scientist in the Department of Atmospheric Science at Colorado State University. My research focuses on the interactions of Arctic clouds, radiation, and sea ice in a changing climate. I've been interested in the earth sciences since I was a young kid, but I have to say my biggest motivation in studying our changing climate is my daughter Mia. She's only 4 years old, and I don't want to leave this burden on her shoulders. I want to make this world a better place for her to grow up in, and I know so many mothers out there feel the same way.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rosimar Rios Berrios. I'm a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, also known as NCAR, in Boulder, Colorado. I primarily use computer models and observations from airplanes to study how hurricanes form and how they become very powerful. I became interested in atmospheric sciences after growing up in Puerto Rico and experiencing many hurricanes myself. With me is my 1-year-old baby, Loki. And for him, I wish that the future won't bring too many extreme weather events. And that's part of the reason why I do the science that I do.
Science Moms have launched a nationwide education campaign to help non-science moms who are concerned about their children's planet, but they aren't confident in their knowledge about climate change or how they can help. Well, let me tell you, I feel like everywhere you look, there is a way for every single person to help. There's so much to do. For example, my daughter just started kindergarten, and the food they're serving to her from the cafeteria is basically chemically processed crap, plastic wrapped, sugar filled, deep fried, highly processed crap grown on, of course, an industrial agriculture farm whose runoff is killing the sea otters. That's right. You heard me. The sea otters. It's Sea Otter Awareness Week, by the way. And while populations are dropping significantly due to pollutants and agricultural runoff that ends up in the ocean. So that chemically processed, industrially grown crap that is being served at, JFK Middle School, wherever you are, if we could fix that and have some locally grown stuff and some maybe organic stuff served in our children's cafeterias, fight back against that crap food lobby, we would also be saving the planet. According to Andrew Johnson, California representative with the nonprofit Defenders of Wildlife, those agricultural runoffs are not only bringing down the sea otter population. Sea otters, so cute. Why would anyone not want to help? But they're also, poisoning the ocean for other wildlife. You can find out what you can do about this during Climate Week and the rest of our lives at wildlife.org. org. And I want to say that was pretty smart of them to put the Sea Otter Awareness Week the same week as Climate Week because it overlaps. You can find out about the Science Moms at sciencemoms.com. I find it very helpful to be able to explain science in a way even Fox News viewers can understand it. Over in New York City, they're celebrating Climate Week by holding on to the failing vestiges of an economic system that destroyed our environment in the first place. Tom Steyer, decent guy, rich as hell, hedge fund manager and co-founder of a community development bank. He also tried to get Obama to stop the Keystone XL pipeline and to do clean energy, back when Obama was in office, when we had more than 100 seconds left on the doomsday clock. Steyer also ran for president. You remember him? Yeah, he was like on the other end from Marianne Williamson. They put the two unusual candidates into corners. He really needed to be coached on some stage presence, maybe take a Toastmasters class or something, but his heart really is in the right place. Right now, he is in New York City trying to get the business sector to get on board with not killing us all anymore. Steyer estimates that to solve the climate crisis, we need to invest over the next 30 years, if civilization survives that long, close to $4 trillion a year, not overall, a year, to transition our energy technologies so that we could have any kind of livable future. Right now, we're investing just above 800 billion. That is a $300 trillion annual gap. And Steyer says it's too much to be addressed by philanthropy or public sector investments. Although that's a good start, he says we need the private sector to get off its assets and get involved in cross-industry collaboration. He's saying, of course, that goes hand in hand with philanthropy and public and private sector funding, but he's calling this movement for businesses movement capitalism. Maybe the idea of movement capitalism won't scare people as much because it has the word capitalism in it, And people are so afraid of any other word like regulation or shared prosperity that they're willing to let their children drown in a coastal flood before they're willing to do something else. Steyer says of capitalism, what movement capitalism is an economic philosophy that employs the foundations of capitalism, which he names innovation, entrepreneurship, and competition, and merges those with the power of global activism in support of a higher public purpose. But the problem is, well, first, it's a great idea, and it just might have worked if and for the fact that global activism for the common good is diametrically opposed to the other foundation of capitalism: greed, Darwinism, winner take all, profits above people. I agree with where you're going, Tom, and every bit helps. But when half the population of the United States is willing to vote for a serial sexual assaulting, murderous, treasonous bigot just to own people who want to share prosperity, give health care to everyone because we have the money to do so, well, I'm not sure if folks are really going to make the jump to that higher level of consciousness that it's going to take to have what you're calling movement capitalism. But more power to you, Tom. If you want to find out more about what he's doing, Galvanized Climate Solutions, which Tom has launched to spearhead the use of movement capitalism. Maybe, Tom, you can come on our show and talk with us. I know a certain lady libertine who I just might ask to help us set that up. Those are the headlines. You're watching ACT TV. Joining us now, Laura Packard, founder of Healthcare Voices. Laura, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let me tell you, please tell me what's going on. I saw that you sent me some information about how the centrist Democrats are basically wanting you to open your pocket and pay more for prescription drugs. And they're holding up the whole, they're holding up the whole Build Back Better Act. They're holding it hostage. Talk about what's going on.
Okay, well, Build Back Better has several healthcare pieces, and one of the key pieces is lowering the cost of prescription drugs to help pay for it, because that taxpayer savings helps fund a whole bunch of other things like expanding Medicare. So it's critical. It'll produce billions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. So we need this, not only because it's a good thing for us to pay less on drugs, but also to help fund our other priorities.
Meaning
And this is
Medicare wouldn't have to pay for it, and therefore they would save money and could cover more people.
exactly.
Okay, I
And
just
this
want to
is
be clear.
incredibly popular.
Yeah, for
But
obvious reasons. I mean, I mean, don't the overwhelming majority of American people support this?
absolutely. Not only is this incredibly popular, it's incredibly popular in the districts of these three Democrats that voted against it in committee. So these three Democrats, Scott Peters in California, Kurt Schrader in Oregon, and Kathleen Rice in New York, voted against their constituents, voted against something that 90% of their constituents want, and voted in favor of their Big Pharma donors.
Are their constituents aware of what's going on?
Well, hopefully they are or will be. There have been billboard trucks in their districts. There
Awesome.
there will be events. People are speaking out because I think a lot of what happens in Washington, people locally aren't necessarily aware of what your congressperson is doing, but this is so critical. They can't be allowed to take these votes in a back room and for the people they represent not to find out about it.
What about Manchin and Cinema? A lot have been placed on their shoulders for holding up, any number of good Democratic priorities, progressive priorities. Are they on board with this?
It's a little unclear. And in fact, today, Biden is having a lot of these problem children meet at the White House to talk through it. But all of these elected officials face a choice. They've all run on saying they would do something to lower the cost of prescription drugs. They've been saying that for years. And now is the time to actually do it. And if they keep saying they'll do something about prescription drugs, but they don't actually do it, nobody's going to believe a word they say.
Meanwhile, the Republicans also made these promises and did nothing. So I just want to put that on the table that if you're in that district, just because this Democrat might be letting you down in this area, that doesn't mean jump ship and go to other people who would also let you down. I have Amy Vilela coming on the show. In fact, I can see her in the Zoom. She's there, which is going to be very exciting. And she is running against someone in Nevada who runs on things like lowering prescription drug prices, whereas she's running on healthcare for all as a human right. Isn't this, I mean, this is important, what you're talking about, but isn't it a little bit of deck chairs on the Titanic kind of situation going on here?
Well, until we structurally reform things, working within the system we have, there's only so much we can do. And we can try to get a better system. But at least for today, for September 2021, the best that we can realistically do is to pass Build Back Better with all the healthcare provisions in it. And so call your representatives, call your senators, and tell them to vote for this. And
call
not
other
letting
people's representatives. Because
Yes.
they need to know that they're being watched. I don't know any representative or senator who doesn't eye the Oval Office or the speakership or, and they don't want higher office. So if they know that nationally they're being watched, their reputation is on the line here. I think that helps. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm holding Democrats to account because we expect better. And it's just the state of the world we live in. And then I expect nothing from Republicans and therefore am not disappointed when they vote again and again against the people.
I'm assuming that these Rice, Schrader, Peters, these people have, pharma connections, maybe took donations. Do we have any evidence about, if we follow the money that it leads back to pharma?
$1.6 million in donations, but also Pharma not only donates directly, but they can threaten to run ads. They have been running ads in key districts all along. They've been running 7 figures of ads. So that's why it's so important that we, the people, speak up, that we have to be louder than the money.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura Packard. Laura, where can people go to find out more information about this and get active?
Well, follow me on Twitter, L Packard. I am tweeting all about it. And if you live in one of those 3 districts, contact your representative today.
Again, everywhere. I encourage everyone to contact that representative. Say, we're watching, the whole world is watching. That was a good Occupy slogan. It's important.
Yes.
Laura, thank you so much for coming on. Laura Packard, founder of Healthcare Voices, always keeping us up to date on exactly what's going on. And it is important that we called today because Biden is trying to grease some palms or whatever he's going to do with these problem children, as Laura said. Thank you so much for keeping us up to date. I appreciate it. No. Yeah. Amy Vilela is running for election to the U.S. House to represent Nevada's 1st congressional district. You may remember her speaking at the rally for Bernie Sanders' presidential run in Nevada. I was there for that, and I was incredibly moved when Ms. Vilela called for Medicare for all and told the story about how her own 22-year-old daughter died after being turned away from a hospital due to a perceived, not even a real, lack of insurance. Insane. As the state co-chair, Amy led the charge for Bernie Sanders' landslide victory in the Nevada caucuses. You remember that. Ms. Vilela has been endorsed by the Sunrise Movement for her bold commitment to the Green New Deal, and none too soon, as Lake Tahoe is suffering from an extreme wildfire and the world suffering from a global pandemic. If elected, she would be the first ever active duty military spouse to serve in Congress. We have her campaign video right here. Take a look, and then we'll be back with a great interview. I'm looking forward to talking with her.
The struggle is real. Trust me, I've lived it. Throughout my life, I have experienced the pain our broken system causes in so many ways. I grew up poor, raised by a single mother. And then, as a young single mother myself, I fought my way out of poverty for my children. I took classes at night to get through college, becoming the first in my family to earn a degree. I became an accountant and later a CFO. Just when I thought I had it all, the illusion was shattered. I was reminded that we are only as safe as the most vulnerable among us. You may have heard the story of how my daughter, Shalyn, died at the hands of our profit-driven healthcare system. You may have seen me on Netflix or traveling across the country fighting for the political revolution. I never thought politics was for someone like me until I realized the political choices we make are quite literally life and death. From COVID to climate change, the status quo isn't working for regular people like us. Now's the time to elect bold leaders who will fight to change our current system that favors the rich and punishes the poor. Now's the time for leaders to fight like lives depend on it, because they do. I'm Amy Vilela, and I'm running for Congress because we deserve more. Nevada deserves more.
I'm Amy Vilela, and I approve this message. Join us today. Visit amyvilela.com.
Amy, thank you so much for joining me on the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here today.
I'm very excited to see you at least sort of in person, face to face, after seeing your very moving speech in Nevada, one of them in Nevada for Bernie Sanders. I do want to say that I'm very sorry for what happened as your daughter was turned away from care and subsequently died by our for-profit system.
Yeah, that was a really tough experience for me. And it's why healthcare is so personal. And it's why I entered politics in 2017. That was following the death of Shalyn. She died in 2015 at the age of 22 from a preventable illness. She had her whole life ahead of her. And, instead of treating her, they did what's called a wallop biopsy and discriminated against her based on what her perceived insurance status was. And basically, they actually told her to go get insurance and see a specialist. They went to a doctor's office when she went to an emergency room. She had every symptom and risk factor for a blood clot. She was Black with sickle cell trait, had sustained an injury for a torn ACL, was on birth control, and just traveled 22 hours to come home to Las Vegas.
Was it like a desk person who just said, oh, no insurance, get out? Or did a doctor even?
So when she first went to the emergency room, she was greeted and they told her, it's going to be very expensive. I was out of town and they were calling me to ask about insurance status, wanting us to call to try to get her on our insurance, which she did not qualify for. There's a difference between military insurance and civilian insurance. She didn't qualify because she had just started schooling and it hadn't started. So she did not qualify for TRICARE, which is military insurance. They told her, you can leave now. It's going to be very expensive. And she's like, no, there's something really wrong. And I'm like, Shalyn, just be seen. We'll worry about that later. When she went to the back, she kept begging for additional testing for something for the pain. And they told her to go get insurance and see a specialist. That was from the physician's assistant.
Amy, I can't tell you how sorry I am for you having to go through that. And your story is similar to stories we're hearing across the country.
It was tragic.
I am very glad that you are running, and it is, galvanizing moments like that have caused people to come into the public sphere. So I appreciate that. And I do offer you our condolences. Can you talk about, Nevada has gone through the pandemic like we all have. Can you talk about the people of Nevada, and are they a little closer to understanding your platform, which is healthcare for all, versus the platform of who's in power now, which is let's fix the prescription drug prices, but I'm not going to go all the way to make sure everyone's covered?
Right. One of the last things I said to my daughter, she was dying in my arms, was you will not have died in vain. And I intend to do everything in my power to make sure I keep that promise to her. And that included me, getting involved in fighting for Medicare for all. I have been working for years on this issue, throwing healthcare rallies, traveling through Nevada as well across the country, sharing Shalyn's story over and over again to really stress the importance and the need for universal healthcare. I've been able to move the needle in Nevada quite a bit. I successfully lobbied 2 of our Congress members to co-sponsor Medicare for all. We still have a lot of work to do. People are realizing, though, that we deserve more. And it's not just in healthcare, it's across the board. We deserve more. We deserve to have a livable wage. We deserve to have a Green New Deal. We deserve to be able to have affordable housing, and so much more. And, with the pandemic, this has only stressed and really amplified the need for us to have this bold legislation, not only, talked about, we need to bring it to the floor. We need to organize and work tirelessly around the clock to make sure that it's brought to the floor and passes.
I think it's so important to have people like yourself with lived experience, including, you talked about having been homeless. Cori Bush, who over the summer, Cori Bush of Missouri, over the summer slept out on the steps of the Capitol to bring attention to the fact that millions of Americans were about to become homeless themselves due to the failure of the government to act to extend the eviction moratorium. Cori Bush, who supports you and has come out to support your campaign, she talks about having been homeless in her life. How important do you think it is for the United States to have members of Congress and other elected officials who truly understand from a first-person point of view issues of poverty and other issues from personal experience?
I think it's so extremely important. I mean, Cori knows, like I know, what it's like to be a single mom, unhoused, with children, not knowing where the next meal is going to come from, how you're going to get secure housing, where you're going to get food. I mean, I remember trying to decide, should I pay the electric bill or the gas bill? Do I have friends or family that I can take my kids to their home and bathe them? I've lived in a 400 square foot home with 2 children by myself, barely making it. And your lived experience really drives your fight and your perception when you're dealing with legislation, right? So when we talk about people needing universal childcare, when you haven't had to sit there and drop your children off at a daycare that you don't feel comfortable with because you can't afford more. And you're sitting at work with your stomach in knots, knowing that your children aren't getting the best care possible, but you don't have an option because you have to feed them. Then maybe that's not as important for them. Maybe it's not something they're going to fight for and drive that legislation for, right? When they talk about bills, that are going to have support systems, if you haven't had to have that struggle, then there probably isn't an urgency, most likely, in making sure that we have legislation in place that is actually addressing the needs of working class Americans.
See, I think you are a major force and a threat even to the establishment, really established Democrats, and also, my words, not yours, but the corporate interests that have infiltrated our politics, obviously on both sides. How are you financing your campaign, and have you seen big money come out against you?
Well, we definitely are not taking any corporate money. I know firsthand the effects of corporate money influence in politics. And I know from my own background, I was a CFO, that corporations don't donate because they believe in good governance. They donate because they want a return on their investment. That is the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And we have seen what happens when progressives run. The establishment will dump a lot of money and do whatever they can. They will almost fight harder against a progressive than they will a Republican to make sure they don't get into office. So with that in mind, we definitely need to be ready, to have our war chest ready. I think one of the most important things for my campaign right now is to make sure that we are fundraising so that we have the tools necessary to fight back and to win this. And I know we can win this. We will need people's help. I will need everyone who's watching or are interested in this campaign to please consider donating. Right now, it's the most important time in the campaign is in the beginning, so that we can set up and get out there and meet people where they are in the community. And definitely, I'd urge anyone watching to go to amy.vegas/act and donate as much as you can. This is so important at this time. And we can use this to really fight back and win this race.
AmyVilela.org is also a place you can go. Is that right?
Yes.
What would a Green New Deal mean for Nevada? You've got the places on fire. The beautiful places that touch the hearts of not just people in Nevada, but anyone who's ever been to Lake Tahoe just has a special place in their heart for it. The fact that it's had such devastating wildfires certainly brings into full focus that a climate, urgent action on climate needs to be done. Do you think the people of Nevada are moving toward your point of view?
Most definitely. There are a lot of frontline community organizers that are working tirelessly on this issue. To give you an idea of how there's a disconnect between our leaders and the constituents in Nevada, every one of our federal legislators right now are supporting a bill that would actually increase the size of Las Vegas by the size of Washington, D.C. While we're facing a water shortage, we have record low ever for Lake Mead, which is our reservoir. In addition to what's happening, we're on fire up in the north. I mean, there is a huge disconnect, and it's a giveaway. Right now, they're more interested in doing giveaways to developers. This would also have a direct impact on our most vulnerable communities. We have a huge housing shortage in Nevada for affordable housing. And the environment. When we talk about the communities that get the most, it's always our urban communities. You could have a difference of 20 degrees from our urban core to the suburbs. So this is, it's very intersectional. When we talk about the Green New Deal, having a Green New Deal would mean that we would be investing in our most at-risk communities. We'd be creating jobs. We'd make sure that we were addressing, the climate crisis that's facing not only Nevada, but the rest of the country, and making sure that we are addressing the racial disparities also that we see in climate justice. So it would be well received by the majority of Nevadans.
Amy, I don't know if this is too personal, but do you think race played a part with your daughter being turned away from service at the hospital?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we talk about systemic racism, I mean, this is, I went to the same hospital with a bad case of heartburn. I was not asked for my insurance when I immediately arrived. I was given, a CAT scan, I was given EKG, I was given intravenous pain medication and held for observation. My daughter was not given those same opportunities. I've seen it time and time again, with all of my children. I've seen the disparity, the differences in the way that they are treated versus the way I am treated. I've, had people talk to me, as if they don't realize who my family is, that I'm a multicultural, multiracial family, that they take liberties in discussing their feelings very openly with me. We have to be.
And then you're like, this is my daughter, and oh God. Oh.
My husband, my husband's
my husband
from Brazil. So yes, when we talk about, systemic racism, it does exist. I have had a front row seat and have seen it, and it cost my daughter, her life.
Amy, I think you're a fascinating candidate because you're like a real progressive, and you're also would be the first ever active duty military spouse to serve in Congress. So you'd have that connection to the military.
Yes.
People often think that the military are, mostly on the right. Talk about the positions that you might take given your knowledge of what it is to be a military family.
We definitely need to have someone who has actual skin in the game, who is talking about the need to stop the endless wars. We need to be going towards diplomacy, not war, and talking about the actual treatment of our veterans and our military members. I mean, there is a huge sacrifice. And once they're done, we have all the money in the world, to support the wars, but we somehow never have the money to actually support our veterans. Our veterans need to have care, and they need to be able to transition back into society in substantial, meaningful ways. When we talk about mental health care, I can't even tell you how much of our population, the majority of our homeless population in Las Vegas, are veterans, and they don't have what they need in order to be able to secure housing, to get mental health care, to get health care. It's gross, and we need to have people who are actually speaking to that. When we talk about, also military families and their pay and how they're treated and the school systems. I mean, there's lots of peculiarities that are specific to military families and veterans. And I think it's time we have someone in office that actually, like I said, has skin in the game and can speak to those.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to people in Nevada who are, considering voting for you as a candidate and voting, or possibly voting for the other Democrat as a candidate in the upcoming primary? What would you say to get the message about the differences between your platforms?
We deserve more. And we need to have a representative that understands the urgency of now. Not only in the state of Nevada, but across the country, we are facing unprecedented crises. We are seeing it with our environment. We are seeing it in not having enough affordable housing. We are seeing our immigrant community time and time again left out. Las Vegas has one of the highest undocumented per capita constituency in the United States. I mean, we need people who are actually going to go to Congress and fight and work tirelessly around the clock to make sure that we get this legislation on the floor and passed. And that means working with our frontline community members. It means going out and listening to our community, and then having, being bold enough and having the drive to actually fight for these issues in Congress. And that is what I plan to do, is to bring the fight to Congress, to represent the people in Nevada in the first district who are being hurt the most by these things, to make sure we have a voice and that we are heard and we are fighting this fight.
I wish you all the best, Amy. I really, really do. I know that you will never compromise because you're in there for more than just the paycheck. You're in there because you're fighting for, a moral fight given an immorality that happened to you and your family. So thank you so much for stepping up, for doing that. I know it can't be easy. And I encourage everyone watching to go to Amy Vilela, Vilela.org, or hashtag Amy, the number 4, the people, which I believe is the Facebook, right? Amy for the people on Facebook.
That's Twitter and Instagram.
And Instagram. Just Google. It's not that hard. You'll find her all over the place. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. And I hope to see you again here with us.
Thanks for having me. We got this.
We got this. I wish you all the best. I don't see you losing. And even if you do, I don't see you stopping. So no. I'm looking forward to where you go.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're watching ACT TV. I'm Juliana Forlano. Stay tuned. I've got a little bit of Professor Wolff I want to talk to you about. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Juliana Forlano. We are here watching ACT TV. We spent all of last week getting together a live stream from the Occupy Wall Street 10-year anniversary. ACT TV was born out of Occupy. So, everyone who worked on it said how refreshed we were feeling and how the spirit of Occupy really came to life. There was a lot of talk about what happened at Occupy and how it led to political and activists going out and going forward and doing more stuff and getting involved in the system. But there was also a little bit more needed talk about what Occupy was actually trying to do, what they were, the another world is possible, just the way they were doing these, it was a lifestyle, not a lifestyle of live in the park, but a lifestyle that is different than what we're living now under our capitalist system. One of the critics of capitalism that we often have on our show is Professor Richard Wolff. And I did have a chance to talk to him about Occupy and its place in history. I thought it was very interesting what he said. So I'm going to bring you in a moment a little clip of that interview. The full interview will be on our YouTube page, ACT TV, in the next couple of days. So here's a clip.
From 1945, and I would say all the way to 2011, that's more than half a century, the left in America could not say anything about capitalism that was critical, with the exception of a few far left groups that had virtually no influence. If people were critical of society, they could talk. It was difficult, but you could talk about racism. You could talk about sexism. You could talk about the environment. You could talk about nuclear war. But you were very careful not to attack capitalism, not to be critical economically. And the reason was simple. It was the Cold War. Anybody who was critical of capitalism was immediately tarred and feathered as an apologist for the Soviet Union, our great enemy, blah, 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 all of that. That lasted from 1945-6 when it started all the way up, and I'm going to exaggerate, but not much, until Occupy Wall Street. And Occupy Wall Street stunned everybody who'd been around for a while because they put right up front and center the 1% versus the 99%. Within weeks, President Obama at the time was using that language too. He took that language. I'd never seen that before, suddenly. And that's why the Lenin quote that you started with is so appropriate. Suddenly, what was unthinkable, let alone sayable, was everyday conversation on the front page of newspapers, in the mouth of the President of the United States, etc., etc. They overcame a 75-year taboo. That's an amazing achievement. And I would go even further than your earlier guest. I don't think Bernie or Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't want to take away from anything that those folks have accomplished, but I think if they were sitting here, they would agree that would not have been possible without Occupy Wall Street, because it showed everybody, and above all the people involved in Occupy Wall Street, how many they were, how strong they were, that the attempt of the right wing in America to say that there were no socialists here. I remember when I was a student in college, one of my courses opened with the professor saying, this course is going to examine why there never was, is not now, and never could be any socialism in America. I mean, and he spoke that with the confidence that you usually associate with morons, right? You know, I mean, it's whoa, you know, it was the thing we were all supposed to nod to each other. Oh, yeah, yeah. And now we're going to learn why that was. They blew all that up. Occupy taught itself. We are many. We are able overnight in cities crisscrossing the country to stimulate, to inspire people like ourselves. You know, I was invited. I was very honored. I was invited several times to give talks in Zuccotti Park to the assembled people, which I did. I was brought up to Bangor, Maine. They had set up an Occupy Wall Street with tents in the middle of that. It's one of the few cities in the state of Maine, but Bangor had an encampment for Occupy. I spoke to them. I did it in New Jersey. I've been in a few places, and I could see for myself that people were astonished. When I would talk at Zuccotti Park, I remember coming home and telling my wife, it was interesting because what people were doing was they were listening to me, I think, but they were looking sideways. And I remember asking a couple of people, am I missing something? And the answers, which were very instructive to me, no, we don't know who these people are. We thought we would come out here and see all the usual people that come out in New York City anyway to demonstrations, but it's all these, and then the words were new people, all the new people. And indeed, when I entered, a few of them spoke with me after I finished my talks. They were often middle-level executives coming out of the office buildings. Zuccotti Park is right in the middle of the Wall Street area, and it's surrounded by monstrous tall buildings full of stockbrokers and lawyers and architects and all of that. And people were coming out for lunch because they wanted to have on nice days to eat their sandwich and their drink and kind of participate, not quite in the middle, but on the edges. And then what really showed me that something was extraordinary was my daughter at the time was a young woman, single, and I discovered that her dates, she was going out on dates like young women her age in New York City do, and the preferred place that the young men who took her out wanted to go was Zuccotti Park. It was a date place. And I said to myself, oh boy, if young people think the cool thing to do is to go on a date to a demonstration, we're living in a different country.
That's fascinating, Professor Wolff. Thank you for sharing that story. As someone who has obviously been around the left for a long time, can you give me the response of your perception of the response of like the older left, that what you said about being able to talk about anti-capitalism, being able to talk about the class warfare, class consciousness even? Most of those conversations were happening like at the Brecht Forum in New York. They weren't happening out on, first HBO and then other channel, Democracy Now!, then HBO, then other channels started to cover it. What kind of response did people who've been trying to get this stuff across for the last 30 years have?
Well, you had quite a range of responses. I was very interested in the same issue, so I paid a lot of attention. So let me tell you what I learned as I talked to people. There was one part of the old left that was so excited, so pleased, so happy. This was what they had missed for 40, 50, 60 years. This is what they had hoped. This is what they had assured one another would eventually come. But by now, it had been a long time and it hadn't come. And yes, they supported civil rights struggles and feminism. And so they got that, but the kind of tried and true 99% versus 1% working people against what in France is called the patronat, the bosses, basically. They loved it. So that's one part of it. They gave money, they gave support, they cheered them on. So that was one group. Then there was a second group, usually associated with the old left political parties in the United States. And they were scandalized. That's the only word I can think of.
Really?
Yeah, what scandalized them, and by the way, there's some overlap. They were happy to see it, but they were horrified by the hostility to organization, by the insistence, if you remember Zuccotti Park, nobody was in charge. Nobody was elected to be the poobah who ran everything. And it was really very impressive. They were, in fact, organized, but not hierarchically. They really must have. I remember it was always women, by the way. That was another thing. It was, in my experience, I gave talks, I believe 3, maybe 4 times. Before each of my talks, I was prepped. A young woman, I would say usually in the 30 to 45 year age range, would arrange to meet me somewhere, usually a coffee shop, and she would be dressed in what I call, a women's office attire, just so. And she would have a nice yellow legal pad, and she would have written down there what she wants to go through with me. It was very organized, very well organized. These young women knew exactly. I was very impressed. But, you had to be inside to see that. On the outside, it was, kind of chaotic in the park. There were lots of street people who were coming because they gave out free meals. They gave you music. They gave you a sense of being welcome. I mean, it was beautiful in its own way, but it didn't have the structure that these older leftists assume you've got to have or you'll never get anywhere. And so there was tension there. There was definitely.
Thanks for watching Act Now. That's our show. We're so glad that you were here with us. Don't forget to leave a comment, tell your friends. We're growing. And if you are part of the progressive movement, which I hope that you are, please leave us a comment on what you're working on, and we'll see if we'll be able to cover it. I hope you have a great weekend. We are off this Friday, but we'll see you next week live at noon on Wednesday and Friday. For now, maybe we'll bump it up. Who knows? We'll see. I'm Juliana Forlano. You can find me on Twitter at Juliana Forlano. You can find ActTV on everything. We're on Insta. We're on Apple TV. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. So please go to everywhere and follow us. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.